the way they go.
Yeah.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you to the meeting tonight. I know it's a very stormy night, and I know that you don't want to stay a great length of time. And I'll just introduce Dr. Murray Nicholson just for a moment there. Trying to sort of get a little bit of background on his work. And the reason, by the way, I should say, the reason why we have Dr. Nicholson here tonight is because we were in a situation where we were trying to get various speakers, and I was busy running back and forth to Vancouver, and Jackie came up with the idea that we'd like to bring Dr. Nicholson in and talk to us about the development of the Catholic Church, and she actually did all the work getting him, and he looks like he's going to give us a very, very good sort of background on the church and about his book. I tried to collect what was in the archives on the church. Found since 1841 a badge that came from, I guess, the celebration of the 150 years. And I was reading through the various things. The thing that I guess every newspaper person seemed to really look at in the history was there were 6 people that got together to start the church originally. So we have more people here than got that church started. So we're a step along the way to the development of the church, and maybe Dr. Nicholson can explain some of the ins and outs of that growth of the church in the town of Newmarket, and talk a little bit about his soon-to-be published book. He says with a smile. He's been working on it for a length of time, and he has it all ready, and he's just trying to find somebody to do the actual publishing. Maybe he'll talk about that too. Dr. Nicholson, would you like to speak? Yeah, I'm Justice. I gave a paper here some years ago on Woodside, the family home. And then you excommunicate. Because I can't get out on Wednesday night because I teach at university on Wednesday night. But anyhow, this book was completed 2 years ago. We've had some problems in our church with the clergy. One disappeared, and the next one didn't get along with the people, and we have a third one now. So I'm hopeful that he will help me get it published, because the Archbishop agrees that it should be published. I have a nice letter from him anyhow. But anyhow, this is about St. John's Church in Newmarket. St. John's Chrysostom of Newmarket is part of the worldwide Roman Catholic Church, which is by far the most ancient, spatially organized institution existing today, extending a network of religious and administrative services at different levels of intensity over most of the inhabited portion of the Earth's surface. St. John's Church does not function independently, but operates within the traditional metropolitan form of church government, based on a hierarchical structure of parishes and missions, dioceses, archdioceses, ecclesiastical provinces, all subservient to the Holy Father in Rome. That's the Pope. You can start stoning. Now, the history of St. John's is aligned to the development of the Catholic Church in Upper Canada. At first, it was part of the vast Diocese of Kingston, but in 1842 fell under the jurisdiction of Bishop Michael Power, who selected Toronto as his see and his administrative center. Subsequently, the Dioceses of Toronto, Kingston, Montreal, and Quebec were united in the ecclesiastical province of Quebec, wherein the Diocese
Quebec became the archdiocese. Very complicated. Now, the influx of Irish immigrants after the 1847-1848 potato famine in Ireland increased dramatically the Catholic population of Ontario, particularly that of Toronto. As a result, there were further diocesan divisions along territorial lines, that is, Hamilton and London, with the establishment by Rome of the ecclesiastical province of Toronto in 1870, making Toronto an archdiocese. Today then, St. John's, guided by Father Tom McKillop, he's the new priest, he's been there a couple of months. I hope to see him another couple of months. Is part of the Archdiocese of Toronto under the jurisdiction of Archbishop Aloysius Ambrosic, who has delegated administrative authority to his auxiliary bishop, Robert Clune. So if you take pictures of confirmations or things like that, you will always see Clune, not Ambrosic, because Ambrosic doesn't come up very often. Now, Bishop Clune is resident in Barrie and comes to confirm our young people. Now, Father Madden, a very knowledgeable priest that I used to know, he's dead now, stated, I quote, like every parish used within a broader context, the history of St. John's is a record of God's providence working through the generosity and devotion of priests and people who have labored and prayed together through the years for the building up of the family and the house of God. One of the major difficulties in researching the history of St. John was a problem of missing records. Books, letters, statues, and other memorial donations. Not being able to find them, I couldn't find them down in Toronto, I couldn't find them here, so I presume they must have been burned or thrown out. Therefore, the use of oral history and parallel material became necessary to fill in the various gaps in the material. This was difficult, it took a long time. There had been 3 different buildings on Ontario Street sites. The first mission on the north side of the street was called St. Mary's. Attached to the west of it was a graveyard identified also as St. Mary's. This early church was taken down to make way for the second church, which was dedicated to St. John Chrysostom as our patron, but the church retained for a decade or so the familiar name of St. Mary's, even though it had been changed. People don't like changing things, so they went right on calling it St. Mary's as well. At the same time, the cemetery was moved to Irish Town, the site of the present graveyard, above Davis Drive there. Commonly known in the last century as Calvary Cemetery, but it's still now called St. John's. They don't keep names, they're very steady among the Catholics in Newmarket. I'd like to change the names regardless. Now, the Gothic structure, St. John's 1, that towered over North Main Street until 1874 was demolished when the current building was erected. The absence of Roman Catholics in Newmarket was indicative of the general population in most of Upper Canada, emerging rural and urban centers during the early 19th century. Early Newmarket was a Protestant, if not a Quaker town. Timothy Rogers had led a group of Quakers from Vermont and settled them in his grant along Yonge Street. In 1820, Newmarket had 14 buildings along Main Street, 3 stores, an inn, always had an inn. Because he must have been, I'll bet you that was owned by an Irishman. A doctor's shop, a blacksmith's forge, and a meeting house. The meeting house was probably Quaker. A shoemaker, a hatter, and a number of milliners provided needed services, but there were no Catholics. At least I haven't found any. However, in the 1830s, Newmarket was a focal point for political dissent prior to and during the rebellion in Upper Canada. It was during this period that Irish Catholics became noticeable, particularly in Toronto. Although reform-minded politically, they were conservative-minded culturally and did not take part in the coming armed rebellion. They chose instead to follow the advice of Bishop Alexander MacDonnell of Kingston to remain quiet in a display of loyalty to the British Crown. There's always Bishop Alexander MacDonnell was a great friend of Bishop Strong, even though they were different religions. Many people try to say they were enemies. They weren't enemies at all. They were great friends. Both had been teachers. Both believed in the crown. Both also believed in some form of episcopal government. And they had the same friends. Both were extremely conservatives and members of the family compact. So they really were friends. They helped each other. I've seen letters, say, dear friend, MacDonald, how are you? They go in and ask about their mutual friends. Now, one reason the British government granted approbation for the formation of the Diocese of Toronto in 1840 was the conviction that the presence of a Catholic bishop might help, I quote, in quelling the spirit of insubordination and fierce democratic spirit displayed in many parts of the frontier line. Remember, the word democratic wasn't a nice word in these days. Demos comes from the Greek word meaning mob. Democracy to the people in the family compact meant mob rule. A few Irish Catholics had attained a measure of success as merchants in Newmarket, getting together in 1838 to plan for a church building. But most who arrived in the following decades were poor and uneducated. Most of them spoke Gaelic. This particular group clustered in an area outside the village of Newmarket, just north of Huron Street, that's Davis Drive, in East Williamsburg, in what became known as Paddy or Irish Town. Although men took laboring jobs in the Newmarket area, the Irish Catholics generally were ostracized in their enclave. They were not allowed to live in the village, nor could their children enter the public school system in this early period. The famine of 1847-1848 in Ireland was responsible for the emigration of a vast number of its inhabitants. Millions of Irish died in Ireland and on the ships to Canada and the United States. The survivors brought with them a typhus epidemic that spread to urban areas along the St. Lawrence River and Lake Ontario. Already burdened with a negative stereotype, these poor immigrants were feared also as the carriers of contagion. Irish immigrant fever spread inland from the fever sheds on the lakefront wharves and reached Newmarket, where the size of St. Mary's Cemetery increased rapidly. In Newmarket, a clinic was opened in the Jeb Brewery building west of Water Street on what is then called Bolton Street, now Darcy. It is possible that the clinic was the beginning of a hospital initiated by Father J.B. Prue in 1847. I'll have more to say about him a little later. The first bishop of Toronto, Michael Power, died while ministering to the sick in the sheds. The Irish Catholics then were poor, doing low-status work, and their lack of education limited their rise in society. They were labeled Mick, Paddy, or Dogan, or in fact worse names, which you really couldn't in front of ladies. The Orange Order was firmly entrenched in Upper Canada, and a lodge was established in Newmarket in 1856, remaining active until 1913, so the era says. However, there are no reported incidents of overt violent action between the Orange and the Green in Newmarket. Isn't that nice? Didn't burn any buildings down. It was thought by many that the Irish Catholics might support the Fenian Brotherhood in the 1860s. In 1866, a mysterious stranger in a large box appeared at the railway depot. Rumor quickly spread that he was a gunrunner, an emissary of Fenians, or, worst of all, an agent of the Pope. An atmosphere of suspicion and fear permeated the village until it was learned his business here was legitimate. Newmarket had been an armed camp with soldiers billeted everywhere. The Irish were told by their priests and especially by the bishop to remain very peaceful. anti-Irish sentiment was common, and because of their culture, they were looked down upon. One Presbyterian prayer that a United Church minister sent me back a few years ago, it goes this way: "O Lord, we approach Thee this morning in an attitude of prayer and likewise complaint. When we came to Canada, we expected to find a land flowing with milk and honey, but instead we found a land peopled by the ungodly Irish. O Lord, in Thy mercy, drive them to the uttermost parts of Canada. Make them hewers of wood and drawers of water. Give them no place as magistrates, policemen, or rulers among Thy people. If you have any favors to bestow, or any good land to give away, give it to Thine own peculiar people, the Scots. Make them members of Parliament and rulers among Thy people. But as far as the ungodly Irish, take them by the heels and shake them over the pit of hell. But, O Lord, don't let them fall in, and the glory shall be Thine forever and ever. Amen." Now, the first church in the town of first Catholic church in the town of York was St. Paul's Church, built in 1822 in Cabbagetown. And the duties of the priest there was the visitation of the outlying areas, particularly towards the north. The first priest missionary in this area was Father Edward Gordon, who on his first trip north lost his way in the ice of Lake Simcoe. However, he visited Newmarket on March 4th, 1830. For 3 years, Father Gordon made his rounds on foot and horseback, carrying with him all the essentials for the administration of the sacraments, including an altar stone on which to say Mass. Possibly he carried his vestments, missal, chalice, cruets, and breviary as well. In 1837, Father McDonough noted that Newmarket had a Catholic population of 56. It had really grown, of whom 34 were old enough to go to communion. What followed was a meeting in November of 1838 in John Walsh's home to determine the feasibility of building a church. The meeting was attended by John Walsh, Patrick Gibbon, Michael Cannon, William Wallace, Francis Rafferty. They're all Irish except that fellow Wallace. You know, I think maybe he might be a Scot. Now they collected $60, which was not even sufficient to begin the church. But the following spring, at another meeting, it was resolved to start building their church, with or without the money, I suppose. Obtaining a grant of land from Mr. George Louch, they began to build the church. I wonder if he is any relation to the fellow that got his neck stretched. His brother? Did he have the land in Newmarket? Amazing. I always wondered about it. The result was a frame building of some 40 by 20 feet, lathed and glazed. By 1840, a visiting missionary stated, I quote, "I have been lately to Newmarket. The church is fit to officiate in, except there is no altar. It is a very pretty church." Officially, the St. Mary Mission in Newmarket began with Father James Quinlan, who was appointed to Newmarket and the Lake Simcoe missions in 1840 and remained until 1845. He had a hard time supporting himself when, I quote, "well off in Newmarket, or their wives paid me not a cent." The parishioners were slow in paying their pew rent, and the Easter collection amounted to $12, even though the congregation had grown considerably. During this early period, Newmarket Catholics were served by an outstanding missionary priest. His name was Father Jean-Baptiste Prue, born in Lachine, Quebec, who was a giant of a man standing 6'4". He commenced a professional career in the pursuit of medicine, studying at the College of Surgeons in Kingston, where he met Bishop Alexander MacDonnell, who convinced him to enter the priesthood. He was ordained in 1835 and took charge of the Indian missions at Penatyne, the north shore of Lake Huron, as well as Manitoulin Island, and as far north as the Sioux. When the Jesuits took over the mission, Prue was recalled to Toronto and became an assistant priest at St. Paul's. The following year, he was assigned to Newmarket as parish priest. He then covered the townships along Yonge Street as far as Lake Simcoe. After about a year, Prue, because of his knowledge of medicine, was called to Toronto, where he worked in the fever sheds with Bishop Power, the Anglican Bishop Strawn, and some brave individuals. Most people that worked in the sheds died with the people there. When this epidemic ended, it had killed Bishop Power, so Prue then returned to Newmarket. Here, as I've said before, he set up a hospital at the Jeb Brewery building on Darcy Street, assisted by a number of French-Canadian laymen. Prue tended the dying Irish who continued to fill St. Mary's graveyard rather than populate the town. Prue was transferred to Oshawa in 1848, where he built a school and became a legendary figure. One of the stories told is that it seems after a rowdy Orange Lodge celebration, there's two Orange in Oshawa, the participants had intended to parade down to the lakefront for the return voyage, though passing through the Irish area. A group of Irish Catholics intended to take revenge for this supposed insult gathered to relay the procession. Prue learned of this plan, and in order to prevent bloodshed, personally led the lively Orange procession to the boat. He later became pastor of St. Mary's in Toronto and died a Monsignor and Dean of Toronto. By 1872, Newmarket's Catholics had outgrown St. Mary's and wanted a new place to worship. It was decided to build the church on the burying ground, moving the bodies to the new cemetery in Irishtown. The eminent Toronto architect Henry Langley was commissioned for the church building project in 1873. He planned a delightful Gothic structure. The era in 1875 described the new St. John's. I quote, "The beauty of the building adds to the view of Newmarket from passing trains. The exterior is simple red brick with a single slated spire topped by a gilded cross. The interior remains just as simple, with subdued light from stained glass windows playing over white stucco walls and a marble white ceiling supported by stained woodwork. The church is very spacious, with an upper gallery near the choir and organ if the lower level becomes too crowded. Archbishop Lynch consecrated the church and the new cemetery. In 1875, the old presbytery was burned down, and in 1877, an Italianate structure was erected on the same site. A school was built following this, and the old church and school were then moved off the property to where we don't know. Probably went with all the books and records, statues. One problem with the new church was the growing weakness of the north wall, likely caused by being struck by lightning in the late 1870s. The wall had to be braced. No doubt comments could have been heard from the superstitious Irish who did not like the church being built on a graveyard where bodies may have been missed because of lack of markers. Some of the Irish couldn't afford a marker. And I know for quite a number of years afterwards, they did dig up skeletons from that cemetery. Another bad sign to the Irish was that the presbytery had burned down. There were omens that they shouldn't build a church there. In 1876, Father William Harris, who was a prolific writer, became parish priest. He was a very popular figure among the denominations in town. He had a great sense of fun, and the following anecdote is remembered. I quote, "When the Methodists were trying to raise money to build a new and larger church for themselves, Father Harris, the Catholic priest, said, He was not permitted to give money for the building of another phase church. However, he was glad to give $10 to help tear down the old one. He was really very well liked, though. When Horace left, he became parish priest in St. Catherine's in 1884. He was honored with a set of silverware by the reeve of the village. I would think that this was because they liked him, not because they were glad to see him leave. In addition, he left advice to the next priest. I quote, "Experience has convinced me that it is not, religiously speaking, a wise policy to harass people with appeals for aid for small repairs, etc. Square dealing on the part of the priest towards his people gives him a great leverage." Now, another great priest, Father Wedlock, was well liked, and surviving parishioners remembered him traveling by buggy or cutter as far as Loretto or Guilford. I have no idea where they are. Around here somewhere? Is that quite a piece?
Like it would be.
Yeah. Or cutter, right?
Yes.
Hearing confessions and dispensing communion. He kept a horse along with chickens in a barn behind the rectory. During the Depression, he often discovered part of his stipend on the rectory porch, a bag of potatoes, a barrel of apples, or a half a pig. Priests had considerable responsibility in any parish that they worked in. They had to pay the salaries of the housekeeper, as well as the stable or servant boys, maintain the rectory, stables and sheds, purchase feed for a horse, the cost of building, maintaining and furnishing the church, and assist the House of Providence, St. Michael's College, and the seminary in Toronto. This out of a very small salary was quite difficult. All the collections and subscriptions were inadequate to cover all parish expenses. Therefore, the priest and laity organized social activities that generated money. These activities were enjoyable, for they involved kin and friends. They included dramas, picnics, bazaars, and garden parties. They still go on today. Priests often obtained half-price fare on the radio to bring in more people, to buy more tickets, to make more money. Admission was 50 cents for adults and 25 cents for children, which included a meal. Separate charges for games, raffles, fish pond, and draws. Meals were excellent: cold meat salads, homemade pies. Often the town band came and the people danced away the evening. Now, a St. John's garden party in 1980 included an Aurora band, which had been commissioned to play. Prizes were an armchair, 3 bags of potatoes, a live pig, a live lamb, a barrel of apples, 5 bags of stewed potatoes, another lamb, and a pair of chickens. You could win these. You think I need that? Is there any chicken? Almost like a little genie. These soirees were very ecumenical because Protestants, as many Protestants came as Catholics, and a lot of fun. Usually there were several bottles in the crowd, live and things. Archbishop Lynch down in Toronto did not allow liquor and dancing at these affairs, but they occurred anyhow. Later garden parties had games of chance, white elephant sale, whatever the hell that is, auction, bake sale, English pub, beer garden, children's races, barbecued snacks, hot roast beef or ham dinner, a dance at night. These often included 450 adults and 200 children, and they were very well attended. I would like to break down on Protestant Catholics. I think more Protestants go to the Catholic bingo nowadays than Catholics. They practically support our church. Following the war in the 1950s, many European families came to Newmarket. German, Lithuanian, Italian, Dutch, and Polish, West Indians, Asian Indians, Filipinos, and Chinese. And slowly St. John's became less Irish and more multicultural. Church societies rose and fell according to need. Altar societies, temple societies, Christian mothers, young ladies, Catholic literary society, Catholic dramatic society. Altar boys were trained in groups under the watchful eye of the priest. One society founded in 1833 by Frederick Osmond in France spread throughout the world. It came to Canada in 1846 and to Toronto in 1850. What they did for anyone regardless of religion was they supplied food, clothing, furniture, bedding, fuel, household utensils, tools, housing. They paid rents, procured jobs. They started a saving banks, a Bon Moore Society to stop the Irish from wasting their money on large and extravagant funerals. Truant officers for the school, Catholic Children's Aid Society, and St. Nicholson's Home were all established by this society. The society came to Newmarket in 1885. This is known as, I didn't even put it down, St. Vincent de Paul Society. It's still in Newmarket, though I think that the Salvation Army does more work nowadays. It is much newer. I think it came around in the 1890s. But, or maybe Catholics are getting richer now and don't need the aid of this society. I don't even know where their drop box is. Up till that time, goods were shipped to Toronto or were picked up by the Sisters of St. Joseph and taken to Toronto when they came around the town to beg. Another vital organization, the Catholic Women's League, began in 1920 in Toronto, but did not formally enter Newmarket until 1925. They taught catechism, visited the sick, they prepared lunches for funerals, they organized retreats, days of recollection, bursaries for Sacred Heart High School, and when the new church was built, they supplied the altar, the lectern, the tabernacle. They held garden parties, dances, bazaars, luncheons, spaghetti dinners, potluck suppers, breakfasts, refreshments, and party functions. They still do. A men's organization, the Holy Name Society, allowed men to receive communion in a body once a month. They also helped the priest with canvases, collections, but they just disappeared. You know what happened? They just faded away. What filled this void were the Knights of Columbus, which were formed in 1974 in town, were named after Dean William Harris Council. They supplied ushers for the church. They ran dances, bingos, always bingos, a minor hockey league. They put those signs around town that say, "Put Christ back into Christmas." They supplied bursaries for the school, and a musical award to Sacred Heart School. One very active group, the Young at Heart. Do many of you belong to that? Just one, that's all. My God. It is a massive number of people. Founded in 1978 by Mary Bergen, is an ecumenical organization for senior citizens. It is a secular and non-denominational group operating on church property and has a membership of about 250 people. They do a lot of things. They used to teach crafts and ceramics. They had social afternoons and bazaars, held dinners, and have extended trips. They're really very active. Now, the parish schools were a central part of Catholic life. When St. John's School was opened in 1880, the Era reported, I quote, "The building is well lighted, has a complete system of ventilation, and is easily heated. The interior offers to the scholars the attractions of a comfortable home." I've never noticed that. But you ought to see it. They just tore it down. The walls are hung with numerous maps and decorated with elegantly framed pictures. When we visited the school yesterday, we found it comfortably heated by a large base burner. The air was pure and healthy, and the scholars as clean and intelligent, a lot of children, as any inspector would care to gaze on. Now, the various orders that taught or worked in the parish included the Sisters of Providence of St. Vincent de Paul, who came to teach in 1941. As well as teach, these sisters had much to do with the social life of the students. They held Valentine's Day parties, they had skating carnivals, Christmas concerts, which included carol singing, pantomime, a rhythm band, dramatic presentations, Indian club drill, and recitations. However, they departed, I think, in 1952, really due to the age of the sisters and the lack of replacements they were getting. In 1957, the School Sisters of Notre Dame came from Watertown, Ontario, and taught for 20 years. However, today, 3 sisters remain to help with pastoral work in the parish. They, however, no longer teach. The Sisters of the Good Shepherd run at Regina Mundi, a farm in Charlotte, which involves work with the youth. Between 600 and 700 youths yearly utilize the facilities there. Now, with the growth of the population, St. John's needed additional schools. Between 1959 and 1992, 7 schools were built, including Our Lady of Good Counsel, Charm, Notre Dame, St. Paul's, Sacred Heart High, Canadian Martyrs, Elizabeth Seton, and St. Nicholas just opened last year. Now, with St. John's becoming crowded, Father Hayes acquired an abandoned Catholic church, St. James, which he found at a mission near Bradford. It had been dislodged from its moorings in 1954 during Hurricane Gale. It was taken apart and transported to the current site in Charm. Then volunteer men reconstructed the church using about 40% of the lumber, the windows, stations of the cross, and the door. 20 feet was added to the building, and the whole structure was covered over with brick and stone. Pews were obtained from a church at Crystal Beach, and by 1964 it was finished, a finished mission church. Father Hayes, really the father of the modern St. John's, ministered to the parish between 1957 and 1970. He organized a parish canvass in 1960. He knew that the accommodations were not adequate. All masses were filled to overflowing. However, he wanted $120,000 in pledges. The canvass was a magnificent success. Pledges were sufficient to obtain new property for a new church and send to and buy land to place a Catholic high school on later. Father Hayes' tenure spanned the whole period of Vatican II. The one unusual thing about Father Hayes is he had a 2-seater airplane. And he used to terrorize me with this kind of thing, as he'd come and take me for a ride. And when I come back down at Harefield, someplace up here in the country, you have to pry my hand off the damn airplane. I was terrified. You know, he'd get in the airplane one day, he said to me, "Murray, you know, I had a heart attack last year." He says, "I hope you've been professional." I really didn't feel very good. However, he was quite a fellow. He's still alive up north somewhere. Now, when Father Hayes left, he was replaced by Father Forgash, who followed him. When he became ill and convalesced, we found out that he stayed at the United Church Manse, being cared for by the United Church minister and his family. It was he who announced that the old church, as well as the rectory and parish hall, would remain, and a new church would be built elsewhere. Of course, this didn't happen. Father Bill Scanlon followed Father Forgash. He had been one of the flying fathers who played hockey for charity. He was Another famous fellow. He quickly formed a building committee, and in May 1978, the new St. John's was ready. Archbishop Pocock blessed and dedicated the church, and it was named St. John's II. This church cost $750,000, and the mortgage was paid off by October 1985. Under Father Scanlon, parishioners began to donate to the food bank established at the Christian Baptist Church, and this was another charitable and ecumenical move. When the Newmarket District Ministerial Association wanted to hold the Christian Unity Service, it was held at St. John's with 600 people in attendance. You might say that ecumenism was in vogue. But again, St. John's was bulging with people, so the parish was split and Elizabeth Seton Church was built, and Father Matthew Roretz became pastor, and the parish complex was blessed in 1991. Father Steve Coates was assistant to Father Roberts when services were held in Sacred Heart High School. He became assistant pastor, then pastor of St. John's when Father Scanlon was moved to Richmond Hill. Father Steve, even though he lost a large proportion of his parish to the building of a new church, by the division quickly surpassed the share life goal of the previous year. He hosted the Yale Glee Club and saw large groups of children making their first communion. When Father Coates took over, he wanted to add an annex to the church to provide offices, meeting rooms, and accommodations for priests. He wanted sound in the stained glass window room at the front of the church. This would be a crying room for mothers with small children. When the 150th anniversary of the parish was celebrated at the arena in Newmarket, Mass was celebrated, a reception was held, and a dinner for dignitaries was served. Since Father Coates' retirement, we have had a new priest, Father Ken Pierce. I liked him, but he only lasted about 8 months. And now the parish is under the guidance of Father Tom McKillop. Now, an examination of St. John's history shows the efforts of the laity and their priests in building the city of God and the city of man. The priests always giving the laity a view of human existence and reality of even eternity. What happened was an ethnic Irish community was replaced by a multicultural community through the creation of 3 churches, St. Mary's, St. John I, and St. John II.
I just want to give you a hug. Yeah, it was really nice, and I always want to learn more about Catholics. Thank you very much.
Now, the question is, are there any questions that you'd like to address to on the floor?
I think Father Whitlock was not very popular because I was reared on stories of Father Whitlock.
Well, that's quite common.
He was an absolute tyrant of their.
Oh yeah, he was now, right? But the children loved him.
Well, I'm not sure. I think they just loved the church. They liked the smart or whatever.
I'll have to take that. I can't change it now. I'm not going to change it.
But aren't a lot of Catholic priests tyrants? Like, isn't that part of being a Catholic?
What were they, Jackie?
Tyrants?
Tyrants?
Yeah. Like,
Well, not nowadays. You wouldn't get away with that sort of thing nowadays. Back in Father McCabe's
they
time,
used to be.
and probably back then. Of course, I wasn't around, so I went around taking oral history off. This is what I got. You know, this is what you have. But I may remember to alter that to use the entire thing.
Well, Father Hayes was a little bit of a tyrant, wasn't he? He wouldn't let, like,
Well, he spoke, and that was how it was.
yeah, like he wouldn't let a person who didn't attend Mass regularly be buried out of the church, right? Like nowadays, they're a little more lenient. Huh?
No, you'd have to prove the man died in poor faith before you could refuse him Christian burial. But I guess that has happened.
I think.
Probably has happened.
There's a story about, you mentioned the early burying ground here that was just the northwest corner there. That was all George Lowndes. George Lowndes had received the grant of that farmland all the way along on the south side of Davis Drive, from about Main Street westward. I think we're right up to Young Street. But anyway, he was a surveyor, and he surveyed that property on Charlotte Street, High Street, all that area there, and subdivided. And of course, when the immigration issue mentioned, the David family, and the Catholics out of cemeteries there, because they centered around the parish or the church area there. Of course, they wanted to be close to the church naturally. So the property was taken up from George, original owner of that.
You know, there were bodies that some
Yeah,
years
I think that
taken out, fought at least that told me that took it up to
You know, the
You
church,
missed it.
the church always likes to get on the highest point of ground.
Well, especially the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
But you notice anywhere in the world, they all
They
do.
do.
They fight the land.
But they
Put their church
they
on.
don't quite get it because they
No, because the Baptist got it.
got their. But the strange part of it is, they beat them in the long run because they got the highest bit of land up in the cemetery in the north part of town, which is much higher.
That's where they should have built the church,
Well,
right?
that's where they got the cemetery, see, so they eventually beat them up the long run. They got
Is
there.
it higher than the Protestant cemetery, George?
Oh, yes.
Oh, it is.
Oh, yeah. It is very high elevation.
I used to be told as a child that my grandfather lived in the house behind that St. Mary's Cemetery on
The one on Ontario,
Ontario Street.
which is the parking lot.
Yeah. They had the house north of it. And my mother always used to tell me stories about you had nightmares of ghosts. And I mean, they were all through his life because he lived beside the Catholic cemetery. There.
We don't really have those
Recurring
surgeries
nightmares.
nowadays. That's, I think most of that antipathy between religious groups ended with the Second World War. By the time the war was over, people had ceased to fight. But I used to enjoy, when I was a child, I always enjoyed the orange border because a little place called Dalkeith, 12 miles away was a little town called Nine Creek Hill, and they wanted to have the orange parade, and they didn't have a white horse for hidden village. And the only person that had a white horse was a French Catholic. he wouldn't loan them a horse unless they let him play King Billy. So they put a mask on, and he led the parade, but halfway up the street the mask fell off. And the orangemen saw it, well, they nearly stoned him.
You said that they belong to the Catholic school?
To the public school, but remember in 1840, what sort of public schools were there?
So how did they get educated?
They didn't get any education.
Where was the
Some of
first?
my ancestors came from here, and I remember I almost said in school, beautiful.
Did they?
You know, they were born in Ireland.
Well, there were many types of Irish people. To give you the idea, there was an upper class and a middle class and a mercantile class in Ireland. Probably spoke beautiful English. The people I'm talking about that came to Newmarket were peasants. Peasants in an urban center. I've done so much work on them. They're completely different from the cultured Irish people that they say live in Dublin or Cork.
But they must have been on time, so I don't know.
Yeah, but they wouldn't let them go because they were outside
They
the
were
boundary
outside
of
the
Newmarket.
boundary.
That's possible.
And north of that was East Bloomberg, and any child who lived north of Huron Street then was supposed to go to that school that was way up close to Sharon. It was too far away
To
for
walk.
those kids to walk to school.
Though when I was a child, I walked further than that.
Well, I know, but it was a long.
But you were hard.
Good.
Is there a reason for the Catholic people wanting to have a church built on a hill?
Yeah, because it's an imposing place to build a church. I guess the idea would be it puts them above everybody else.
I think they maybe feel the need to be closer.
That, I think more likely though, Jackie, was because they had thought that they were putting it over the province, being higher up. I'm not sure. You're really guessing here. You give me a lot to think about. Maybe I'll write an article just on the question.
Dr. Nicholson, Murray,
Yeah.
if you approach Guelph from any main road in Guelph,
You
you
see
always
one
head
church.
toward that hill with the big Catholic church on top. Every single
The
road.
Church of Our Lady, yeah.
Which I didn't know the name of it, that's it.
It's a beauty.
In
It's
town,
and it's a Protestant town, has made a law that nothing can be higher than that church. It's the Protestants that did this, not the Catholics. But it's such a beautiful church. It was built mainly from money sent by Carlotta, who was the crazy wife of Maximilian, the only king of Mexico. She sent the money up to build that church.
Why?
Mainly because the fellow that got the money happened to be her confessor. And she wasn't exactly a very moral individual. Maybe he told her to save her soul. She should give some money. But she's the one that really started the building of that church, which was supposed to be larger than St. Peter's in Rome, but it wasn't. They ran out of money. So it is an immense structure, beautiful church.
in Holland, there isn't the fragmented numbers of religions that we have here. There's the Protestant church and the Catholic church. And originally there was the Catholic church. But around the time of Martin Luther, they all became Protestants. And the Catholic religion was outlawed until within the last century. So in every town, the Protestant church took over the existing church. So in every town in Holland, right downtown in the center city square is the Protestant church. And out a couple of miles away is the Catholic church. But they're not on hills. There's no hills there.
No. Well, of course, the Netherlands are very flat. It'd be hard to get a hill. But most places you see that, especially in Britain. I entered all those former Catholic churches that are all Anglican now, since the Reformation. Some of them are beautiful ones. I told them they weren't keeping these things up very well. Some of them are terrible shape, like Salisbury Cathedral was just falling apart. Yeah. They're working on it. It's going to take a lot of work. Yeah, and Glastonbury is not very